alcohol absolutely decimates my recovery, my sleep, my performance, etc. But for a lot of people, drinking is just a pervasive and deeply ingrained habit in our lives. And so even with the data, it's not enough to necessarily make the long-term habit change that we need to change our relationship with alcohol.
Welcome back to the Fit Insider Podcast. I'm your host, Joe Veneri. Today I'm joined by Nick Allen, co-founder and CEO of Sunnyside. In this episode, we discuss the rise of mindful drinking. Nick talks about using technology to help users form healthier habits. Plus, we explore alcohol's impact on culture, relationships, and well-being. Let's get into it. The Fit Insider Podcast is brought to you by Jack Taylor, our exclusive PR partner. More than just PR, they're creative storytellers and brand builders who actually understand the health and wellness industry. To learn more, head to fit.co/Jack Taylor. That's FITT.co/Jack Taylor. Hi, Nick. Welcome to Fit Insider. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks so much. Really excited to be here.
Yeah, likewise. We were chatting a little bit offline. We've certainly interacted. We've had you and Sunnyside as a Q&A on the Fit Insider site. We've certainly followed not only the company, but the broader space around mindful drinking. So this conversation, I think, has a ton of value to bring, both for people who are trying to live a healthier lifestyle and for people who are, utilizing technology, I think, to help people do that same thing, change their habits and live more mindfully. So to kick things off, can you just introduce yourself and tell us about what you're working on?
Yeah, happy to. So I'm Nick Allen. I'm founder and CEO of Sunnyside. At Sunnyside, our mission is to help anyone who regularly drinks alcohol unlock kind of improved overall health and wellness by being more mindful and intentional about the role that alcohol plays in their lives. And so unlike most of the other services in the kind of alcohol health space, we take a really differentiated approach that's focused on kind of proactive managing the role that drinking plays in your life, rather than the industry standard up to this point, which has been kind of waiting until you have this rock bottom moment and then deciding that alcohol has no place in your life at all. And so unlike those kind of reactive kind of somber services that are really focused on sobriety and this kind of like all or nothing approach to alcohol health, Sunnyside is really about kind of taking a proactive approach and limiting and balancing rather than kind of going all or nothing. And so it's a very kind of differentiated position in the market, but one that I think is really important when we start to consider the impact of alcohol on our overall health.
Yeah, and I think even from that positioning, not necessarily about addiction and recovery, although those are obviously important topics and there are other kind of products and solutions that exist for that. But now kind of thinking about, and I think as a lot of people are, and we're seeing this in like the rise of low and non-alcoholic beverages or people using other technologies to kind of track the impact of alcohol, just thinking like, what does it look like to have an awareness, as you put it, like prevention around maybe overconsumption, arriving at that place? Was this through, I think oftentimes, especially in like the health and kind of wellness categories, it's like encountering this problem from a personal perspective, family perspective, and then kind of looking around and saying, oh, wow, there's like probably nothing for me, or is like that resonates with me. Was it similar for you, or how did you even come to this kind of category and kind of problem in the first place?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it really was all of the above for me. So for kind of my own background, I grew up in a household with two parents who are actually in recovery from alcoholism. Both my parents kind of waited for a long time to get help when it came to their drinking. And ultimately, kind of it became a big enough problem in their lives that they decided that they needed to cut drinking out entirely. And so to your point, I've got the utmost respect for the decision to go completely sober because it had a profoundly positive impact on my life. Both my parents went from kind of drinking to going the traditional AA route and kind of have now been sober for about 30 years. And that had an extremely positive impact on my life in terms of the quality of kind of my childhood and kind of growing up in a family that didn't revolve around alcohol. What that meant for me as I kind of started my own explorations around drinking and kind of my own relationship to alcohol is I pretty quickly, with the help of my parents, recognized that I had some of those same risk factors when it came to my own drinking patterns. And I realized pretty early on in my experience that if I'm not thinking about and being mindful about my alcohol consumption, it can be really hard for me to find the off switch. It can be difficult for me to kind of keep alcohol in the place that I want it to be in my life. And so over the course of kind of my now 2 decades of exploring my own relationship with alcohol, I've had a lot of ups and downs. And up to this point, sobriety has never felt like the right fit for me. I've never gotten to a place where it's kind of been such a dominant force in my life that I felt the need to go to complete zero. And yet at the same time, I know that if I'm not being thoughtful about my consumption, it can sneak up on me, and it has in the past. And so Sunnyside really kind of emerged from, a lot of personal experimentation of, systems around kind of trying to keep my own drinking in check. And when I designed the Sunnyside system, it was kind of the last system I feel like I'll ever need to kind of manage my drinking consumption. It's a long-term program. It's designed to really help you change habits and also kind of maintain those habits long-term. And I really am kind of customer number one. I designed it for myself in a point where I was feeling that kind of, the balance kind of getting out of whack. And ultimately kind of from there realized that there's probably a lot of other people like me who are interested in kind of keeping tabs on and maintaining awareness about their consumption without necessarily feeling like, embracing the label of alcoholic or feeling like, I need to go to complete zero. And it turns out that that's a huge population of people. And then the Sunnyside value proposition is really resonating in this kind of, focus on balance versus, wait until it's a big, huge problem and then do something about it, which is it's just not how we kind of deal with other areas of our wellness. And there's no reason that should be the default approach for kind of managing alcohol consumption either.
Yeah, I think there's kind of a lot that I want to maybe touch on there, from the impacts within family dynamics and social environments culturally, right? With those kind of very singular choices, right? That
Right.
between drinking and not drinking, and then what does that mean? But just in terms of what the kind of product experience looks like today, from somebody who would pick it up, what does that look like? How does it work? And how do you then encourage people to be more mindful about their drinking?
Yeah, so Sunnyside is a deeply personalized experience that's really designed to help you meet your specific goals when it comes to kind of the role that alcohol plays in your life. And so up front, our members go through a kind of diagnostic quiz where we start to understand a little bit about their current habits, kind of where they are with their drinking, their goals. And for some people, that might be quitting entirely. But for most of our members, it's reducing the frequency with which they drink or reducing the intensity of drinking on drinking days. And so we start by really deeply understanding kind of where you are and where you want to get when it comes to kind of your own habits around drinking. From there, the Sunnyside system is, I would say, delightfully simple. It's a structured approach to helping build upfront awareness about kind of when you intend to drink, and then using a series of nudges to help you kind of stay on track with the plans that you've created for yourself. And so at a very basic level, every week on Sundays, our members come together and look at the week ahead and create a series of targets for themselves in terms of identifying the days that they intend to not drink. And then on the day that they do plan to drink, kind of setting an upper bound for themselves in terms of kind of having an intention and kind of an idea in mind, kind of coming into those planned drinking days. This is kind of a small but really mighty part of the experience, where just pausing to consolidate the decisions for the week ahead into a single point in time, so that you don't have to rely when you get home on Tuesday after a hard day of work. You don't need to say like, am I going to drink today? And rely on willpower at that point to make the choice. You've already made that decision and you've created an accountability roadmap for yourself for the week ahead. And so this planning process is a really important piece. And then from there, basically, Sunnyside works with you in an automated system to help you stay accountable to your own goals. So rather than us telling you what to do or kind of saying, hey, you shouldn't drink today, rather we say, hey, your intention for today was to not drink. Let's work together to stick to that target. And let's think about some alternatives that can help you to get that sense of relaxation or de-stress without the need to kind of turn to alcohol to kind of have that temporary fleeting experience. So at the base level, there's this kind of planning experience and then this daily tracking and nudge experience that help folks kind of stay accountable. And then on the other side of the experience, we've got a number of kind of human to human connection opportunities to help people, be reminded that they're not alone on this journey and that they're not kind of, working on what can often feel really solo, right? Really, really kind of lonely. And so we've got a member community where folks interact around daily reflections in order to kind of solidify their habits and their intentions around healthier drinking. And then a coaching experience where you can actually access a team of human coaches via text message to get help and advice along the way in order to kind of help reinforce your goals and kind of stay accountable to yourself. So that's kind of the high level experience. We really try to make Sunnyside and the whole act of mindful drinking fun and positive and bright, rather than kind of somber and clinical. And so it's non-judgmental, it's really easy to use, and ultimately it's about helping you reach your goals, not telling you what to do or chastising you for, having a drink on a non-drinking day, or kind of whatever happens to happen. We know that life happens, and we meet you where you are, and we help you get where you're trying to go at the pace that feels comfortable for you, without kind of some predefined, all or nothing kind of template, which a lot of the other services kind of offer.
Yeah, I think all those things super interesting, and thanks for kind of breaking it down there. It's, that approach, right, around, you said small but mighty, and the nudges, and helping people just even bring, you know, I don't know necessarily folks who go into like any type of planning around when and how much they're going to drink. It is oftentimes kind of left to chance, and then next thing you know, it's like, oh well, like 3 4 days last week, or I planned on having like a casual drink, and I was like way too intoxicated compared to where I thought I was
Right,
going to be or wanted to be.
right,
And
right.
so
And
even
then you
bringing
really
that,
regret it. Then you really regret it the next day, right? I mean, that's what we're really trying to help you avoid, is, the ones that you really end up not feeling good about the next day. So we actually think we can help you enjoy alcohol and life more by cutting out those ones that are just like, why did I do that? Or, now I don't feel great today, and my day's kind of thrown away, right?
for sure. I think one thing I wanted to get your perspective on is like, this is not uncommon, right? You see, whether it's trying to track a diet, nutrition, macros, meal planning, fitness, making sure you work out and you log those workouts and you look back on them and kind of stick to the plan too. Even now we've seen with like fasting, right? Like making sure you set and track and timing. It is very simple going into it. You're like, oh, I'm going to build this app or system that lets you do these things and make sure that you kind of stick to the plan. And there's countless kind of untold numbers for different areas, whatever verticals, categories within health and wellness. And it is super challenging, right? It
Yeah.
is to acquire customers, to build a technology and kind of system that people want to stick with and that they do in like a meaningful way that has to produce results, or else they're just going to churn out of it, and that they're going to continue to pay for over time. When you were going into this, did you have that thought of like, this is super tricky, and this can be, it seems probably easier than it is, right, to build the system than it is to build a business around this system. How have you maybe avoided that pitfall of like, we built this thing, it's awesome, it works, but man, we can't get people to use it, we can't get them to stick with it, and ultimately it's like, it's not a business in the sense that you've gone on to raise venture capital for it, like, and are scaling it. So I mean, for somebody who's in that similar position as a founder or operator or thinking about this space, what was that like for you to think through, and then how have you gone about executing it with like that all of that in mind?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say that, simplicity for us really is a feature, not a bug. And so the idea for us, and kind of the art of the product design, is really creating an experience for the end customer that is seamless and simple and fits into your life, while building a bunch of technology underneath that makes the smallest action on the consumer side the most interesting and valuable in terms of what you get back out of the experience. And so one of the things that we did really early on was investing in SMS as a core, text messages basically as a core component of the customer experience. And so rather than expecting you to like remember to open an app every day and build the habit around using the app before you actually start making progress towards the target habit in question, we meet you where you are in the SMS inbox. We piggyback on an existing habit around checking your texts, which everyone does all the time. And we created a really novel delivery mechanism that uses text message nudges and two-way message interactions in order to kind of create, the lowest possible friction experience of logging. And I think that's something that really makes Sunnyside unique, is that customers get started, they immediately know how to use the product because it's a text message kind of habit that they already have. And then that helps them to kind of, find that aha moment really quickly and stick around for the long term. So that's a little bit about kind of the product design from a really early point in the experience, and kind of in the building of the company. The product was resonating with people. Folks really loved the fact that we met you where you were, that we kind of piggybacked on your existing kind of lifestyle and didn't expect you to make some big change right off the bat. Rather, kind of gave you these kind of subtle steps to get to a place where people were seeing profound change pretty quickly. And then most importantly, we're actually kind of maintaining those gains for the long term, right? So we designed Sunnyside to be your system of record for mindful drinking for life, rather than like a crash diet type experience where it's like you use it for 30 days and then you bail. And that so far has been really successful for us. the point is not lost on like the challenge of building the business here, right? Like it isn't an easy thing to do to kind of productize and build a business around habit change. But one of the things that we've found has been really valuable for us is that we're building on the cusp of a massive shift in consumer behavior around alcohol more broadly, right? We're seeing purchase behaviors around drinking changing a ton. We're seeing new science emerging around kind of the impact that even small amounts of alcohol have on our kind of broader health and wellness. And we're seeing the conversation really start to pick up in, pop culture, celebrities, kind of new brands that are emerging. And so we truly believe that we're kind of riding an existing tidal wave versus trying to kind of create a new behavior from scratch. And that's super important. And when we look at the landscape of alcohol health up to this point, it just, in terms of apps and services, it just hasn't caught up with consumer sentiment where like, just like we know that kind of sugar and saturated fats maybe aren't great for us, like most of us don't cut those things down to zero. Rather, we kind of think about balancing the role that those things play in our lives. And there just hasn't been anything to help people manage alcohol in the same way, despite knowing that's a more effective way to kind of manage consumption rather than, waiting until it's a huge problem or trying to kind of white knuckle it to zero, right? Which just doesn't work for the vast majority of people.
Yeah, I think the positioning, the timing, the product itself, a lot of those things kind of lined up in a way that enabled you, right? That like so many times when you look at basically the overlap of those things, timing, the interest and knowledge of the category, right? All of those can dictate whether or not a company is going to succeed
Totally.
and fail. And it can be all of the right things, but maybe the timing was off, or the shift in culture was off, or the
Right.
technology underlying it was off. So it's great to hear that in some ways, like a lot of those things are lining up to do that, and kind of as it exists today. And you mentioned like, and I like this idea of like system of record for mindful drinking into the future. What does the business model look like now, and do you anticipate that like that's going to remain relatively kind of similar as you evolve what it is?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we are a consumer subscription business, and so today we offer a 15 to 30-day free trial, depending on the entry point, to really get started on the path to mindful drinking. And then it's an annual subscription that really helps you make a long-term commitment to improving drinking habits. So one of the key insights that we're kind of building around here is that, the decision to drink more mindfully is not something that you like achieve and then you're done and you're finished, right? It's actually something where, as long as the temptation to overconsume alcohol exists both in our minds as well as kind of broadly in society, having a tool to help you kind of stay accountable to yourself becomes really important as a lifetime utility rather than something that you kind of, use for a short period of time and then leave. And so with that in mind, we've really designed this for kind of an upfront annual commitment because it makes a lot of sense for the use case, right? We're asking people to make a commitment that we know takes some time to kind of build these habits, and also to kind of lean on us as an external system to help them to help maintain those goals for the long term. And that's been working really well for us. I do think that there's a clear opportunity as we look forward to bringing this product to audiences by way of universities where student populations are obviously drinking a lot and not generally open to sobriety, but obviously there's a lot of incentive to kind of minimize binge drinking on campus communities. And then also I think employers become really interesting as well as we again create a really differentiated value prop where I think the idea of kind of getting a sobriety or an addiction service from your employer just feels like kind of an awkward kind of value exchange given the kind of dynamics of employer and employee. But when your employer is kind of talking about alcohol in the context of your proactive wellness, and in about kind of bringing drinking into balance, like we've learned to manage, diet and exercise and mindfulness with the help of kind of employer and access to kind of, wellness benefits, that value proposition becomes a lot more straightforward and gives us a really interesting leg up when we start to think about that next phase of distribution. So, but we're seeped in consumer in our DNA. Like we really love building a business that's close to the consumer. It's allowed us to optimize kind of the end user experience much more deeply than I think we would have if we had started B2B, and actually gives us a huge leg up when it comes to data and understanding of the product's efficacy that kind of lays that foundation towards the B2B side as well.
Hey everyone, we'll get back to the show in just a second. But first, I wanted to tell you about our exclusive PR partner, Jack Taylor. Honestly, this one's a no-brainer. We've known the Jack Taylor team for years. They work with some of the most innovative health and wellness companies. We're talking Whoop, Athletic Greens, Hyperice, and many more. Jack Taylor has an extensive industry network, knows how to work with high growth companies and really invest in building long-term relationships. I know this firsthand because they're Fit Insider's PR agency, so I can confidently recommend them, and I do all the time. From startups to more established brands, they go beyond pushing product to help companies truly thrive. To learn more, head to fit.co/Jack Taylor. That's FITT.co/Jack Taylor. Now back to the show. Yeah, I think as you were talking about that, it definitely could make sense. The B2B is always tricky, especially when it comes to like health and wellness, making that shift and kind of seeing like where do the incentives lie, and is it just to optimize this for distribution to the employer so they'll pay for it, and whether or not the consumer experience kind of maintains to the effect that it's like it's generating the result that you want. Whereas when you're a consumer product, like the incentives are aligned, you have to
Yeah.
continue to
Yeah, right. To deliver an
hold up
amazing
your
experience in order to keep
exactly.
our folks around. Yeah, it's true, and I think it gives us a unique advantage ultimately because we've got that kind of direct consumer pressure to be great, and that's something that we take really seriously.
Yeah, and another one that could potentially be interesting and that I think does have the incentives potentially a little bit more aligned is like among gyms and studios that are already having these conversations. You know, we're seeing the conversation around mindful drinking, consumption, and alcoholism, and all these things kind of moving into the not only gyms and studios, but like wellness clubs and social experiences and
Right.
concerts now, like music festivals. Like, what does it look like to have that? So, yeah, I think that the shift in culture, right, kind of it being in your favor, I think there are people that it's like there could be those channels. I'm sure you've already thought of these things, but just as relates to the audience, I feel like I could see them nodding their head, like, yeah, I think there is a lot more interest and opportunity there as well.
That's right. And one of the things that we're really trying to do to unlock that opportunity is this kind of challenges concept that we've put together. And so we've built a product experience that allows folks to kind of join in a community-based challenge, not necessarily that's like go dry for 30 days, which has kind of been the typical, like the Whole30 or like crash diet style approach to mindful drinking, but rather take 30 days to really evaluate the role that drinking plays in your life and do that with a community of people that you kind of know and trust. And so as one example, we've actually set up a Fit Insider challenge that folks can access at sunnyside.co/fit. And that actually provides an entry point where people who are interested in kind of testing the waters of more mindful drinking can go ahead and sign up, choose the flavor of the challenge that fits what they're looking for, whether that's going fully dry for a 30-day reset or not drinking on weekdays or cutting your normal consumption by 50%. Kind of choose that flavor and then work together in community to actually kind of accomplish those goals. And so it's a way that we're really thinking about how we can access exactly what you said: gyms, wellness communities, even partnering with brands who kind of have audiences that are interested in more healthy lifestyles more broadly, and helping to connect the dots between alcohol and these other areas of health that are kind of commonly sought after, right? Turns out that drinking has a direct impact on sleep, on diet and weight loss, on productivity and likelihood to kind of exercise, on stress and anxiety, on broad mental health. And so if drinking is something that's out of balance in the context of your overall wellness, it becomes really hard to make progress towards those other goals. And as soon as you start to kind of balance drinking and kind of turn that dial, we found that our customers are finding great success in those other areas of their wellness journeys as well, which is why it's so important that there are options out there that don't pre-require you to say like, I have a drinking problem and I have to go completely sober. Rather, it's like, I want to lose that last 10 pounds or I want to improve the quality of my sleep. Here's a tool to kind of give you a structured approach to help you do that, basically.
Yeah, I think it's super smart, and the community aspect, obviously, in general, right? Social connections, bringing people together around shared goals and just like-minded approaches to things, having a support system, but in this case, kind of tapping into the growing interest in health and wellness more broadly, and then bringing them together around that. The on the community aspect, and when you mentioned it about the product, I also wanted to into the challenge point. Are you seeing, or I guess, how willing are people to engage in conversations about this? Because it has been stigmatized. It has been maybe off limits. You don't, we kind of touched on it earlier, and I said that I wanted to circle back to it, but so for myself, like I don't drink at all, almost, not because I had a problem with alcoholism. It just ultimately I was at a point where I was doing it for sports, not drinking as much because I wanted to focus on sports performance. And then, I graduated college and didn't play sports anymore. And it was just naturally part of my lifestyle. I didn't feel great whenever I did drink. And so it just became less and less frequent to the point now where it's like, I don't know, it maybe a couple of times a year or something along those lines. But now at, 37 years old, it's still being out somewhere and somebody being like, well, why not? Like, why aren't you drinking? Why don't you? Do you have a problem? Like, hey, how about just one drink? How about one more drink? And so it's always been, really crazy from that perspective, that the peer pressure is like on the opposite side. It's like the fact that I don't drink is like the weird thing versus, you know, whatever rationale goes around. So back to the point about community, is it something that people have to warm up to? Is it something that there is a barrier to? And then how do you kind of build with that in mind?
Yeah, so I think that your point around, the idea of this kind of false binary of alcohol is does a huge disservice ultimately today in terms of like helping people get started on the path to more mindful drinking, right? So when you see the world as like the alcoholics and everybody else, and if people who are not drinking must have a drinking problem, right? It really skews the kind of frame of reference for the opportunity in drinking more mindfully as a way to kind of unlock overall health. And so what we know now about alcohol use disorder, which is kind of the new term for alcoholism more broadly, is that it's a spectrum condition, right? It's not like you have a severe problem or you're totally fine and you can drink as much as you want. In fact, there's like a lot of folks who are at varying levels of either kind of on the spectrum in a more mild state or not on the alcohol use disorder spectrum, and yet kind of who are drinking enough that maybe it can become a problem over time, right? And so there's a lot of reasons in that middle area for people who might want to work proactively on drinking so that it doesn't become a huge problem. And yet when we kind of think about this world as us versus them, it really can be alienating to start to talk about the role that alcohol plays in your life without feeling that pressure to kind of accept the label. With that said, we're seeing this change every single day. And I think Sunnyside's positioning in the market really helps folks to embrace mindful drinking as a positive and proactive investment rather than something that kind of comes with a bunch of shame. And a key part of the brand position of Sunnyside in kind of taking that really differentiated, proactive and preventive approach is that it really becomes easier to celebrate mindful drinking as something that you're doing in the same way that like we celebrate diets and mindfulness journeys and kind of exercise milestones by putting drinking into that same frame of reference and kind of recontextualizing it in that lens. It becomes much easier to socialize around drinking, around more mindful drinking. And so our community strategy really hinges on tying alcohol back to those other areas of your wellness that you already are investing in and find important. And so when someone asks you why you aren't drinking, you can talk about it in the context of like, I have something to do tomorrow and I feel excited about it. Or, I'm working on improving my sleep, which is like, yeah, of course everybody is. Or, I'm working on, my weight loss or exercise goals, and like alcohol is just the level I was drinking before just is no longer aligned with those kind of wellness goals. And that's something that gets people thinking in a different way, not to automatically assume that you've got a problem, but rather to realize that you're on top of it and maybe want to emulate that. It turns out that mindful drinking is actually made a lot easier when you're doing it with the people that you tend to drink with are also kind of working on being more mindful about their consumption as well. So there's an inherently social layer to this experience, whereas sobriety can be a really kind of isolating and challenging and kind of single player choice. The decision to drink more mindfully and to kind of balance when and how much you drink is social, and therefore does have a lot of kind of natural community that we can build around it. So we're just getting started on this path, but I do truly believe that our approach and our differentiated position allows us to tap into community as a strategy, kind of much more directly than kind of the existing players in the space that have this kind of sober kind of overhang, basically, that makes it a lot harder to talk about and to project outwards with your communities, because it is kind of grounded in this idea that you have a problem and you have to fix yourself, rather than like you care about your health and alcohol is a major influencer on that health, and therefore it just makes sense to work on it, just like we work on diet, exercise, sleep, etc.
Yeah, I think flipping it kind of on its head is a definite benefit to how you're approaching the space. But also, something that we see more and more is how these kind of fractured or siloed aspects of health are now becoming one. It's all becoming part of this holistic approach to health and wellness, where you wouldn't think about your fitness journey separate from nutrition, separate from sleep, recovery, all these other verticals, and certainly drinking and how much you drink being a part of that and its implications across all these other aspects of health. So as that continues to happen, is there a thought, because obviously one of the things, at least it seems to be in my social media feeds, is like people sharing a screenshot from their Aura ring and being like, wow, I drank, I had a glass of wine, whatever, too many drinks, too close to bed, and like I had terrible sleep. It like destroyed me. And you see those things popping up. Is there a thought to integrate with, partner with, whatever it is, wearable, other apps, different communities, to say like bringing this awareness, now that it is there out in the world, to the Sunnyside community, to say like it's super tangible, like we can't debate
Right.
this, like here's what the data kind of says, and how
Yeah.
are you approaching like maybe that opportunity?
Yeah, it's a super interesting phenomenon. When you talk to anyone who's used an Aura Ring or a Whoop or even a Fitbit, what you learn is that often the kind of most profound insight that folks are getting from these passive data collection is like alcohol absolutely decimates my recovery, my sleep, my performance, etc. And for some people, just having that insight is enough to say like, okay, I'm not going to drink anymore because like I care enough about my health that like this data is telling me about the impact, and now I'm going to kind of stop. But for a lot of people, drinking is just a pervasive and deeply ingrained habit in our lives. And so even with the data, it's not enough to necessarily make the long-term habit change that we need to change our relationship with alcohol and to actually like use that data as an starting point to kind of optimize performance and to optimize around kind of alcohol consumption. And so we provide this really unique layer that I think really supplements some of this kind of passive data tracking of a structured approach to how to change drinking and how to maintain those habits for the long term. And so I think that there's a really interesting interoperability strategy here where we can kind of bring that data in that you're collecting elsewhere in your life and actually become the source of truth to help you understand the impact that drinking has on every other area of your wellness, right? And also, more importantly, how changes to drinking habits, and often small changes, can have a really profound impact on your broader wellness picture. And so that's absolutely a key part of the roadmap, is kind of how we interoperate with kind of other data collection. Like we don't intend to be, the sleep tracker or the calorie tracker or any of these other pieces, but all of those pieces kind of play into drinking because drinking actually does impact all of those things directly. And so reading and writing the data from those different areas and giving you kind of the score of like, hey, on nights when you have more than 4 drinks, it turns out that your sleep is impacted in this way, your recovery is impacted in this way, even like your step count the next day is impacted in this way. And so we can actually help you really understand like, where is the breaking point in your own personal relationship with alcohol, where like the decisions you're making the day or night before are likely to impact your performance the next day. And that becomes really magical because then we can help you kind of walk right up to that line and not cross it, right? And that's really about kind of maximizing enjoyment while minimizing kind of the downside impact on your health.
Yeah, really interesting. It was, to the point around maybe stigma, maybe how much of a hot button issue it is, or even the kind of hold or place alcohol has in culture, right? I think, one time I tweeted something along the lines of, the kind of wearing a wearable device and seeing the impact of alcohol, and then still being like, but I'm just going to do it again. And like, and that's not to diminish anybody, again, that if you have problems with alcoholism, or you maybe don't have the support system to make the changes around mindful drinking. And I hope clear enough to say like, it's definitely not intended to be judgmental. It's just like an interesting phenomenon of like, even having that insight,
Right.
still alcohol playing such like a strong role that like you still can't quite get out from that experience.
That's right.
And the responses were everything from like, you know, basically I'm incredibly insensitive and I don't understand, alcoholism, to on the flip side, people being like, that's me. Like, I care so much about my health. I spend all this money on all these wearable subscriptions, gym memberships, supplements, and like still look at that score. And then like basically the next weekend find myself in the same position where like I see this negative recovery and like I'm not able to do anything about that. So I think bringing that together in a way that helps you understand, like, oh, here's kind of where the line is. Because I think that's also something that we just generally lack. It's like you're feeling good, and then all of a sudden, like, you're blackout. Like
Right, right, right.
it
And you're
escalates
really not feeling
very,
good the next day. Yeah, exactly.
yeah,
Yeah.
it escalates very quickly.
That's right. You know,
So yeah,
and for a
maybe
lot of
this,
people, myself included, like when you start, it's really hard to find that off switch. So like there's a lot of work we need to do to kind of help people build awareness around the actual act of consumption in order to be able to kind of hit the brakes when you know it's the optimal time to do so. And we do a lot of kind of awareness building in terms of conscious interruption between each drink that you have, instead of kind of immediately going to the next one, kind of giving you a space to create a pause, to take a deep breath, and to check in with yourself so that you can really kind of intercept that automated routine of like immediately opening the next drink or kind of ordering the next one as soon as the first one is finished. And that's such a powerful moment in between where we can really help people kind of actually kind of hit the brakes at those specific points. But I think the point is, you know, the thing that's super interesting about alcohol, which is very different from a lot of other kind of substances in our lives, is like 70% of the US population regularly consumes alcohol, and about 47% of people self-identify as wanting to cut back on drinking. And so there's this really weird kind of disconnect where like the idea of wanting to cut back feels scary and feels stigmatized and et cetera. And yet we know that like half of us are open and interested in the idea of kind of changing our drinking. And so the more we can talk about it and the more we can bring the conversation into the popular wellness dialogue, I think the easier it becomes for people to take action and to take that first step that allows them to break some of those kind of key patterns, right? If you're wanting to cut back, or if you're feeling like each weekend is a repeat of the same, that's probably a good indication that like a little more structure in your approach to how alcohol kind of, you know, embodies itself in your life is worthwhile. And that's exactly the person that Sunnyside is really succeeding with today, is that person who like doesn't want to quit, doesn't think they're a problem drinker, and yet maybe has some of these kind of ingrained psychological habits that make it really hard to, despite all the data that we now have available,
right,
make and sustain a change for the long term.
yeah, maybe one more question almost along those lines before we get you out of here. When it comes to reaching those people and resonating with them, is this, for, I guess from a, whether it's a marketing or customer acquisition or however you think about building this community standpoint, is it a matter of tweaking that messaging and finding the channels where these people are and like appealing to the interest that they already have? Or is it more so doing a lot of educating out in the market about the concept of mindful drinking versus just like that kind of pent up demand already existing and you kind of tapping into it? How do you see that working on the acquisition side? And like, do you think that there's a risk of maybe exhausting the people who have already kind of are out there looking for a solution like this versus having to convince people that they might need something like this?
Yeah, it's a really important point, and I think, you know, what we're seeing around us is that consumer behavior is growing consumer demand is growing every day around the desire to drink in a healthier way and to kind of enjoy the benefits while kind of minimizing the downside. So up to this point, we are seeing a lot of latent demand in the market that is continuing to grow in terms of folks who are actively seeking out the ability to change their habits. With that said, we're kind of pushing against a lot of inertia around this kind of false binary that we've talked about around like, you know, problem drinkers and everybody else. And our goal is to really help the everybody else understand that like there's still a lot of reasons to work on drinking proactively, you know, even if you don't consider yourself a part of that kind of other bucket. And so on the marketing standpoint, we're doing a lot of work to help connect the dots between alcohol and other areas of your health that you're already working on, because that becomes a really easy way to say like, okay, like I'm going to work on drinking as an input into my weight loss goal, or I'm going to work on drinking as an input into my sleep improvement goal. And that becomes a much easier value proposition to latch onto versus like, I'm going to, you know, click on an ad about recovery and like go into this kind of really like heavy, you know, somber, like fix myself experience, which like is great for the fraction of drinkers who need to go completely sober, who have had a hard time moderating, and like sobriety is not a realistic outcome for them. I have the utmost respect for that decision, but it's just simply not enough. And we need more tools and more options out there to help activate more of this huge population, 47% of people in the US who say they want to cut back, give them the tools and the vocabulary to do so in a way that's positive and proactive and approachable. And that's Sunnyside's kind of key value, is that we create a much easier starting point and entry point. And because we never talk about sobriety and we're not built around kind of sobriety as like the golden path, right? It becomes much easier for us to start the conversation with those people who, you know, when they see sobriety, they tune out because that's not what they're looking for. With us, we can help you reach your goals rather than push an agenda on you, which I think is a really important way that we break down the stigma and open the addressable market to, get more people who could really use to benefit alcohol in the context of their health activated and empowered to do so.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the perfect pitch and maybe thought to leave people with, is that, if they're interested in learning more, seeing what the experience is like, the messaging around being more mindful resonates with them. Check out Sunnyside. You mentioned like the little kind of onboarding and test a try. And yeah, I appreciate you taking some time today to share not only the journey, but the impact that you all are hoping to have. So appreciate you being here, Nick. And yeah, I encourage people to check it out.
Yeah, it's been my pleasure. I really appreciate the time. And again, for Fit Insider folks who are interested in kind of getting started as part of a community, sunnyside.co/fit will get you started on the challenge. And I think it's a really cool way to kind of take that first step in a way that's fun and non-judgmental. So really looking forward to kind of seeing how folks jump in.
Awesome, man. Appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much.
One more thing before you head out. Help us spread the word. Take a minute to rate and review the podcast, subscribe to the YouTube channel, or share this episode with a friend. And if you like conversations like this, you'll love the Fit Insider newsletter. We send it every Tuesday. The link is in the description. Thanks again for listening. We'll see you back here next week.